I got engaged and everything was calm until my sibling quietly reinserted my ex into my life, encouraged him to message my fiancé, and then told me I was controlling for asking them to stop. I'm 30F and I got engaged last fall to my fiancé, 32M. We've been together almost 4 years. Things were solid, calm, normal. We were taking our time with planning and just enjoying being engaged. My sibling, 28M, has always been competitive with me, but not in an obvious way. More like constant little comments. Jokes about how I always rush into things. Jabs about how I get bored easily. Stuff I usually ignored because I didn't feel like turning every conversation into a fight. Then my ex, 31M, started showing up in conversations again. Not physically, digitally. It started with my sibling tagging him in memes about relationships, then replying to his comments under my posts. Then suddenly my ex was following my fiancé on Instagram. That alone made my fiancé uncomfortable, but we figured it was just awkward coincidence and internet overlap. Then my fiancé got a DM from my ex saying, "Just make sure you really know who you're marrying." My fiancé showed it to me immediately. I felt sick in that hot, shaky way where you already know something is wrong, but you don't want to say it out loud yet. I asked my sibling if they'd been talking to my ex. They said, "We're adults. I can talk to whoever I want." I said, "Did you tell him to message my fiancé?" They said, "I might have mentioned that you were engaged and that he was worried about you." I said, "Worried about me or trying to stir things up?" They said, "You're being dramatic. He has a right to speak if he thinks you're making a mistake." That was the moment I realized this wasn't accidental. I told them to stop involving my ex in my relationship. I told them it was creepy, disrespectful, and way out of line. They laughed and said I was acting territorial and that I didn't own people. I said, "I don't own anyone, but you don't get to recruit my past to sabotage my future." They snapped back, "Sabotage? Please. You just don't like anyone questioning your perfect little story." I told them to stay out of my engagement. They said I was power tripping and that I've always needed to control the narrative. I told them they've always needed to compete with me even when there was nothing to compete over. That turned into both of us yelling, not even listening, just firing insults back and forth until someone else told us to knock it off. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A few days later, my fiancé started getting more messages. Not directly from my ex this time, but from mutual acquaintances who suddenly wanted to check in and ask weird leading questions about whether we were moving too fast and whether I was really over my last relationship. One person straight up asked him if he was sure I wasn't still emotionally tangled. He came to me pissed, not at me, but at the situation. He asked who was feeding people this stuff. I already knew the answer. I messaged my sibling and said, "Why are people suddenly acting like my relationship is a public debate panel?" They replied, "Maybe people are just concerned. You don't inspire confidence." That sent me over the edge. I told them to stop running their mouth about me and to stop playing messenger for my ex. They said, "If your relationship can't handle a little outside opinion, that's not my fault." I called them and started yelling. No polite voice, no careful wording. I said they were being messy on purpose and that they were obsessed with proving something about me. They yelled back that I was arrogant and that I treat everyone like they're supposed to clap for my milestones. I told them they weren't clapping, they were throwing trash. They said I was insecure and that my fiancé deserved to hear both sides. I said there are no sides. There is my past and my present, and they don't get to mash them together for entertainment. They told me to calm down. I told them to shut up. After that call, my ex blocked me on Instagram but kept watching my stories from a business account. I know because my sibling casually mentioned it like it was funny. I asked how they knew. They said, "He told me." That turned into another fight. I said they were keeping tabs on me through him. They said I was paranoid. I said, "Then why are you getting play-by-play updates about my posts?" They said, "Because he still cares about you." I said, "And you still enjoy being in the middle of it." They called me bitter. I called them a parasite. They told me I was nasty and ungrateful. I told them they were desperate for relevance in a relationship that wasn't theirs. Then my fiancé got added to a Snapchat group he didn't recognize. No message, just added. The group name was something dumb and vague. 2 people sent him messages asking if he was okay and if he wanted to talk privately. He left the group immediately and showed me. I recognized one of the names as someone my sibling talks to a lot. At that point, I didn't even text. I went straight to my sibling and confronted them face to face. I didn't ease into it. I said, "Why are you sending people after my fiancé like he's some kind of project?" They said, "I didn't send anyone. People have minds of their own." I said, said, you just happen to be discussing my relationship with everyone except me. They said, because you can't handle feedback. I said, feedback is not planting doubts and whisper campaigns. They rolled their eyes and said, you always think you're being attacked. I said, because you're literally doing it. They raised their voice and said, you're not special just because you're engaged. I raised mine right back and said, and you're not entitled to tear it down because you're bored. That turned into a full-blown screaming match. They accused me of acting superior. I accused them of acting resentful. They said I always get what I want. I said they always try to take whatever I have. They said I make everything about myself. I said they insert themselves into things that don't involve them. They told me I was overreacting and embarrassing myself. I told them they were embarrassing themselves by chasing attention through my ex. They said, at least he listens to me. I said, yeah, because you're feeding him a story where you get to be the hero warning everyone about me. They didn't deny that. They just shrugged and said, maybe I think he deserved better than how things ended. I said, then date him. Don't weaponize him. They told me I was disgusting for saying that. I told them what was disgusting was using someone I cut contact with to mess with my engagement. They said I was twisting everything. I said they were twisting my life into a spectacle. After that, things got quieter, but not calmer. They stopped talking to me directly, but started posting vague stuff on Facebook about watching people make the same mistakes over and over and being the bad guy for telling the truth. People started asking me if something was wrong. I ignored most of it, but my patience was gone. Then my fiance told me someone had messaged him saying my sibling had told them he should be careful because I don't handle commitment well when things get boring. That wasn't even subtle anymore. I lost it. I called my sibling and said, keep my name out of your mouth. They said, if the shoe fits. I said, you're lying about me. They said, I'm sharing my perspective. I said, your perspective is not my biography. They said, you can't control what I say to people. I said, no, but I can call you out when you're being fake and messy. They told me I was trying to silence them. I told them I was trying to stop them from trashing me to justify dragging my ex into my engagement. They said, you're obsessed with blaming me. I said, because this started when you decided to play puppet master. They laughed and said, you really think you're that important? I said, important enough that you can't keep my name out of your conversations. That's when I told them flat out that if they kept involving my ex and spreading garbage about me, I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine anymore. No more polite family interactions. No more letting things slide. I said I was done protecting their image when they clearly didn't care about mine. They told me I was threatening them. I said I was done being quiet. After that first conversation where my sibling basically admitted they'd been talking to my ex, I told them straight up to stop involving him in anything related to my relationship and to stop contacting my fiance. They laughed. Actually laughed. Like I had just told a joke. They said, so now you get to control who I talk to. Wow. Power trip much? I said, no, I get to control who interferes with my engagement. That's not the same thing and you know it. They rolled their eyes and said, you're just scared he might say something true. That hit a nerve. I said, don't flatter yourself. The only thing I'm scared of is you acting like this is some weird game. They smirked and said, you've always been insecure. This is just you panicking because someone who knows you better might expose the cracks. I told them they were being obsessed and that it was creepy to be this involved in my past relationship. They shot back, you always act like everyone is jealous of you. Get over yourself. Not everything is about you. I said, then why are you texting my ex about me and my fiance? Explain that. They said, because someone has to look out for you since you rush into things and then act shocked when it blows up. I said, you are not looking out for me. You're poking at my life because you're bored and you like watching reactions. They told me I was dramatic and that I've always needed to be the center of attention, and now that I'm engaged, I'm acting like everyone owes me silence and obedience. I told them, you don't get to pretend this is about concern when you're literally feeding my ex information about my relationship. That's not concern, that's stirring crap. They said, maybe he deserves to know you're already repeating your patterns. I said, you sound obsessed with my past. It's embarrassing. That's when the voices went up. Not just tense, but full-on raised voices. They accused me of always playing the victim and dragging everyone into my feelings. I accused them of getting some kind of satisfaction out of messing with my life and hiding it under fake protective sibling nonsense. They said I was ruining the family mood again and that I always bring negativity into things when people are just trying to joke around. I told them, your jokes involve my ex messaging my fiance. If that's your idea of humor, get better material. They called me sensitive, said I can't take criticism, and that my fiance probably already has doubts and I'm just projecting. That set me off. I told them, don't drag my fiance into your little mind games. He hasn't done a single thing to you and you're treating him like collateral. They said, if he can't handle someone asking questions, that says more about him than me. I said, no, it says more about you that you think it's your job to interrogate interrogate him through my ex. They told me I was twisting things and that I always rewrite situations to make myself look attacked. I told them, you literally admitted you talked to my ex about me being engaged. That's not a rewrite, that's your mouth. They snapped back that I'm paranoid and controlling, and that I've always tried to isolate people when I feel threatened. I said, you don't get to label basic boundaries as control. You just don't like being told no. At that point they said, maybe he should warn your fiancé before he gets trapped in your cycle. I lost it. I told them, you are not some hero in this story. You're being messy and it's gross. They told me I was ungrateful for their concern, and that one day I'd thank them for trying to stop me from making another mistake. I said, stop pretending this is about my happiness. You don't even like him. You just like being involved. They said I was exhausting and that I always turn small things into huge conflicts. I said, you turned my engagement into a group project with my ex. Don't minimize it now. They stormed off after that, saying they were done talking to someone who refuses to listen to reason. Later that night, I was scrolling and saw my sibling had posted something vague about watching people repeat the same mistakes and refusing to learn. My ex had liked it and commented something about some people don't want to hear the truth. Not even subtle. I didn't comment. I didn't react. I just felt sick. Then my fiancé told me my ex had sent another message asking if he could talk man to man and that he just wanted to make sure everything was on the level. My fiancé didn't respond. He blocked him. When I confronted my sibling again about that, they said, see, that reaction alone should tell you something. If there's nothing to hide, why block him? I said, because he doesn't owe my ex access to his life. They said, or because he's scared of what he might hear. I told them, you really want this to be about him being the problem instead of you being out of line. They said I was deflecting because I don't want to admit that maybe my ex has a point. I said, you're the one who won't drop this. You're acting like this is some mission. They said, someone has to be honest with you. I said, you're not honest, you're intrusive. They said I was impossible to talk to and that I only hear what I want. I told them, no, I hear you clearly. I just don't agree with you and you can't stand that. They called me stubborn and said I've always needed to be right, even when I'm wrong. I told them, you're not protecting me. You're crossing lines and then acting offended when I notice. They walked away again, and after that, communication went cold except for passive-aggressive posts and likes and comments between them and my ex that kept popping up on my feed no matter how much I tried to ignore it. My fiancé is trying to stay calm about it, but I can tell it bothers him. He keeps saying he doesn't understand why my sibling is this invested in dragging my ex into our life. Honestly, neither do I. My sibling did not like that my fiancé blocked my ex and that I told them to stay out of my relationship at all. Quick pause before this gets worse. If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to like and subscribe. Trust me, it only escalates from here. The next morning, I woke up to a wall of messages from my sibling, not asking how I was, not asking if things were okay, just straight into accusations. They said I was isolating my fiancé and training him to cut people off. They said I was acting controlling and that it was exactly why relationships don't last with you. I told them to stop projecting their issues onto me and to stop inserting themselves into my engagement. They replied, you always push people out when they question you. You can't handle anyone who doesn't worship your choices. I said, questioning is different from sabotage, and you know that. They said, you're just mad because I see through you. I told them, you see through nothing. You just like stirring the pot and watching people panic, then pretending you were trying to help. That's when they sent me a screenshot. It was a private message thread between them and my ex. In it, my ex was complaining about how I never take accountability and how I rewrite history when things don't go my way. And my sibling had replied, that's exactly what I told him. She does this to everyone. I don't even remember typing my next message. I just remember my hands shaking. I said, so you're sitting there validating him, feeding him lines, and you want to call that concern? They replied, I'm being honest with him. Sorry if the truth hurts. I said, you are playing both sides and pretending to be helpful while you fuel the mess. They said, or maybe I'm the only one brave enough to say what everyone thinks about you. I told them, don't drag everyone into your little games. This is you. This is your mess. They shot back, you always need a villain. It's exhausting. I said, no, what's exhausting is watching you poke holes in my life and then act offended when I notice. They switched tactics fast. Suddenly I was the one attacking them. They said I was cruel, that I was twisting innocent conversations into conspiracy theories, that I was punishing them for caring about me. I said, caring doesn't look like coaching my ex on what to say to my fiancé. They said my fiancé was too soft and that he'd never survive a real relationship if he couldn't handle hearing from an ex who knows the real you. I said, funny, he's handling this way better than you are, and he's He's not the one obsessively messaging people behind my back. They told me I was smug and acting superior now that I was engaged. I told them they were bitter and acting like a rejected audition judge. They said I always play the victim. I said they always play puppet master and get mad when someone cuts the strings. That's when the messages turned ugly. They said I was desperate to lock someone down because I can't stand being alone. They said my fiance probably didn't know what he was signing up for. They said I trap people with commitment and then act shocked when things fall apart. I told them, at least I don't need to lurk in my sibling's relationship to feel important. They said, wow, so now I'm pathetic for caring. I said, no, you're pathetic for enjoying this. They replied, you think you're the main character in everyone's life. Newsflash, not everything is about you. I said, then stop making my engagement your personal entertainment. They left me on read for a few hours after that, and I stupidly thought maybe they were cooling off. They weren't. Later that day, my fiance told me my ex had tried to message him again from a different account, asking if he could just talk man to man for 5 minutes, and that he deserved to know what he was getting into. My fiance didn't respond and blocked that account too. I messaged my sibling again and said, did you seriously tell him to try again after he got blocked? They replied, I didn't tell him to do anything. I can't control what he does. I said, you just told me you were telling him exactly what you think about me. Don't play dumb now. They said, maybe if you weren't so secretive, people wouldn't feel like they need to warn each other. I told them, if you think trashing me to my ex is protecting anyone, you need help. They said I was spiraling and that I was proving their point about being unstable when confronted. I said, you're not confronting me, you're undermining me. They said, same thing, you just don't like it. At that point, I told them I was done talking if they couldn't respect my boundaries. They responded with, there you go, running away again. I said, no, I'm stepping away from someone who keeps crossing lines and calling it honesty. They didn't answer after that, but they didn't stop either. That night, I noticed my ex had liked one of my siblings' posts about watching people repeat the same mistakes and refusing to listen. No names, but the timing wasn't subtle. A few relatives liked it too, which felt like getting slapped quietly in public. My fiance saw it as well and asked me if this was going to keep happening. Not accusing, just tired. I didn't know what to say, because I honestly didn't know how far my sibling was willing to take this. I messaged my sibling one last time and said, if you keep involving him, you're making this a bigger problem than it already is. They finally replied, if your relationship is that fragile, maybe it deserves to be questioned. I said, or maybe you just can't stand that my life isn't revolving around you. They left that on read too. Since then, no messages, but the social media stuff keeps happening. Likes, comments, vague posts that feel pointed without being direct. My ex still hasn't stopped trying to get around blocks. My sibling hasn't said another word to me, but it doesn't feel quiet. It feels like they're waiting. So I asked where this was coming from. No one wanted to say it directly. Just a lot of, well, people talk and you know how things spread. I didn't need to guess who was watering that garden. I messaged my sibling and said, you're talking about me behind my back. They replied, people ask questions. I don't lie. I said, you absolutely shaped the story and you know it. They said, maybe if your past wasn't so messy, there wouldn't be stories. That wasn't random. That was aimed. They know exactly what buttons to push and they hit it like they were waiting for the chance. I told them, you are obsessed with rewriting my life so you can feel important in it. They said, or maybe I just don't buy your perfect fiancé act. I said, stop calling me that like I'm playing a role for attention. They said, well, you always need an audience, don't you? At that point, I wasn't even trying to keep my tone calm anymore. I said, you're using my ex like some kind of character witness and pretending it's concerned. They said, he's the only one brave enough to say what everyone thinks. I said, then why are you whispering it instead of saying it to my face in front of everyone? They said, because you wouldn't listen anyway. You never do. I said, I'm listening right now and all I hear is you trying to compete with me. They laughed and said, trust me, I don't want your like. I said, then stop trying to control it. They fired back, you control everything. That's your problem. You always have to be the main character. I said, and you always have to be the commentator. They told me I was paranoid, dramatic, and addicted to conflict. I told them they were manipulative and bored and using my relationship as entertainment. They said I was spiraling. I said they were instigating and then hiding behind fake concern. They said I was embarrassing myself. I said they should be embarrassed for dragging my ex into my engagement like it was a group project. Then they blocked me on messaging apps. Not everywhere though, because right after that, I noticed they started liking posts on Instagram and Facebook that were clearly pointed. Stuff about engagements that won't last, jokes about people settling out of fear of being alone, videos about how people ignore warning signs and regret it later. They didn't tag me. They didn't need to. Everyone who knows us knows exactly who that was aimed at. And relatives noticed. I started getting messages like, "Are things tense between you two?" And "I hope you're not letting stress ruin family relationships," and "Your sibling just wants what's best for you." What's best for me apparently included my ex getting a front row seat to my engagement, and my relatives getting vague warnings about my judgment. I finally lost my patience and commented under one of those posts, not tagging anyone, just saying, "If you have something to say about me, say it directly." Within minutes, my sibling unblocked me long enough to message, "Wow, playing victim publicly now." I said, "You've been doing that for weeks. I just stopped pretending I didn't see it." They said, "You really think this makes you look good?" I said, "I don't care how it looks. I care that you keep using my name for your little performances." They said, "You're acting unhinged." I said, "And you're acting calculated." Then they blocked me again, but not before my ex liked that same post and added a comment about people who can't take feedback. My fiance saw it. He didn't say much, just closed his phone and went quiet for a while. That quiet was worse than yelling. Later, he told me my ex had tried to follow him again on another platform after being blocked the first time. Different account. Same message tone. Casual. Like they were old friends catching up, not someone reaching into an engagement they didn't belong in. I messaged my sibling from a different app they hadn't blocked yet and said, "Tell him to stop contacting my fiance." They replied, "He's an adult. I can't control him." I said, "But you can encourage him, and you are." They said, "You're not as innocent in all this as you pretend." I said, "What does that even mean?" They said, "You like the drama. You always have." I said, "You are the one dragging old relationships into my current one." They said, "Maybe your current one should hear the truth." I said, "The truth about what? Be specific." They didn't answer that. They just blocked me again. After that, the social media stuff kept going. Not constant, but just enough to keep poking. Likes on shady posts. Comments on mutual friends' pages about people ignoring red flags. Little reactions on anything related to weddings or couples that felt like they were aimed straight at me without ever saying my name. And the relatives kept checking in, not to support me, but to feel out whether the rumors had teeth. I stopped responding to most of them because every conversation felt like I was being evaluated, not listened to. My fiance finally hit his limit and messaged my sibling directly. I didn't even know he had done it until later, but he told me he couldn't sit there anymore while my sibling kept reaching out to my ex and bringing him into our relationship like it was some kind of group project. He messaged them and said, straight up, to stop contacting my ex and to stop talking about our relationship to other people like it was open for discussion. My sibling replied, "If you can't handle feedback, you shouldn't be marrying into this family." My fiance told them this wasn't feedback, this was interference, and that they were crossing lines that weren't theirs to cross. My sibling said he was naive and didn't know who he was dealing with, and that people don't just walk into this family and start making rules. My fiance told them, "No one is making rules. We're asking you to stay out of our relationship." That's when my sibling said he was stealing me away and that I'd changed since I started planning a future with him. My fiance replied, "No one owns her." My sibling shot back, "You're acting like you do." My fiance said, "No, I'm acting like she's an adult who makes her own choices." My sibling told him he was filling my head with nonsense and turning me against my own family, and that I'd regret it when things fell apart like they always do. At that point, my fiance told him to stop dragging my past into things and to stop pretending like he knew what was best for me when he clearly didn't respect me at all. My sibling ended it with, "You don't get to decide what's best for her. That's not your job." My fiance said, "And it's not yours either." I found out about this whole conversation because my sibling sent me a message later that night, clearly angry, saying I needed to control my fiance and that he had no right to talk to him like that. That set me off. I confronted my sibling and told them to stop acting like I'm property that needs managing and to stop talking to my ex like they're recruiting witnesses. They said I was choosing a man over my own sibling. I told them, "I'm choosing my own life over your drama." They said I'd regret cutting family off for a relationship that probably wouldn't last. I told them, "You cut yourself out the second you started dragging my ex into this." They said I was turning everyone against them and playing victim. I said, "You did that when you couldn't stop meddling and then blamed everyone else for being mad about it." They told me I was heartless and selfish and only cared about myself. I told them they were spiteful and couldn't stand that I wasn't revolving my life around them anymore. They said I was ruining the family and tearing people apart. I told them, "You started the fire and now you want sympathy for the smoke." That's when they completely lost it and started sending me long messages about how I was ungrateful, how they'd always always been there for me, how I owed them loyalty, and how I was throwing it away for someone who wouldn't stick around when things got hard. I told them to stop acting like they were entitled to control my choices just because we're related. They replied, "That's rich coming from someone who can't even see she's being manipulated." I said, "You're not protecting me, you're trying to control me, and you're mad it's not working." Then they brought my ex up again and said he at least knew who I really was, and that I used to listen to people who cared about me. That pissed me off more than anything else. I told them to leave my ex out of it and that they had no right to keep dragging someone from my past into my present just to make a point. Quick pause before this gets worse. If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to like and subscribe. Trust me, it only escalates from here. They said I was rewriting history and pretending like nothing ever happened. I said, "What happened is over, and you don't get to weaponize it because you don't like my fiancé." Then they said I was acting like I was better than everyone else now and that I thought I was too good for my own family. I told them, "No, I'm just done being talked down to like I'm a child who needs permission to live." They told me I was acting arrogant and cold and that I'd changed into someone they didn't recognize. I told them, "Maybe you never recognized me. You just liked when I did what you wanted." That turned into them accusing my fiancé of isolating me and slowly cutting me off from everyone. I said, "No, you're doing a great job of pushing me away all by yourself." At some point they started sending messages on social media too, not just regular texts. I blocked them on one platform and then they popped up on another, saying I was being dramatic and that blocking them was proof that my fiancé was controlling the situation. I told them, "You're proving exactly why I blocked you. You don't know when to stop." They said I was acting like a stranger and treating them like an enemy. I said, "You turned yourself into one when you decided my relationship was your business." They told me I was cruel and that I didn't care who I hurt as long as I got what I wanted. I told them, "What I want is for you to leave me alone and stop stirring up messes with my ex and everyone else." They said I was throwing away family over a man who hasn't even married you yet. I said, "And you're willing to blow up my peace just to feel important." That was the worst fight we've ever had. It went in circles, it got personal, and it was ugly. There was a lot of yelling, a lot of accusations, and a lot of things said that I don't think either of us can pretend didn't happen. My fiancé heard parts of it because I was so angry I wasn't even trying to be quiet anymore. He didn't jump in, but he was right there, and afterward he told me he was done trying to be polite with my sibling if this is how they were going to keep acting. My fiancé showed me the message and said he wasn't doing anything unless I was there too. So yeah, that's how we ended up in the same room. It didn't start calm. It started tense and quiet, the kind of quiet where you already know it's going to explode. My sibling immediately went after my fiancé, saying he was dividing the family and creating drama that didn't exist before. My fiancé said, "You were contacting her ex behind our backs. That's not normal and you know it." My sibling said they were just checking facts because they didn't trust that I was getting the full picture. I cut in and told them, "You don't get to investigate my life like I'm some case file." They said they were worried about me and that I was being defensive because I didn't want to hear the truth. I told them, "The truth is you can't stand that you don't get to run things anymore." They said I was disrespectful and that I used to actually listen to them before my fiancé showed up. My fiancé told them, "Stop talking about her like she's not sitting right here." My siblings snapped back, "Then tell her to stop acting like I'm the enemy." I said, "You made yourself the enemy when you started pulling my past into my present." That's when they admitted they'd been talking to my ex more than they originally said. Not just once or twice, but multiple conversations, just to understand what kind of person my fiancé really was and whether I was rushing into another mistake. I lost it. I told them that was creepy, manipulative, and completely out of line. They said I was overreacting and that if I had nothing to hide, I wouldn't be so angry. I told them, "I'm angry because you went behind my back and then acted like you were doing me a favor." They said my fiancé was turning me into someone who lashes out and burns bridges. My fiancé said, "No, you're just finally hearing her say no." Then my sibling turned it back on me and said I'd always been impulsive and emotional and that they were the one who had to clean up after me when things went wrong in the past. I told them, "You don't get to rewrite my life like I was some mess you had to manage." They said I was ungrateful and that they'd spent years looking out for me while I jumped from bad decisions to worse ones. I said, "And now you can't handle that I'm not asking for your approval." They accused my fiancé of enjoying the drama and liking that he was pulling me away from everyone else. My fiancé told them, "I don't need to pull her away. Your behavior is doing that on its own." That set my sibling off. They started started listing everything they'd ever done for me, every time they'd stepped in, every time they thought they protected me, and basically said I owed them loyalty because of it. I told them, you don't get lifelong control over me because you helped me before. They said, so that's it? You just replace people and move on. I said, no, I grow up and make my own choices, and you can't stand not being in charge. Then they looked at my fiancé and said, when this falls apart, don't come crying back to us. My fiancé said, she's not property you get to return when you're done with her. That's when my sibling said, you really think she won't blame you when she realizes what she gave up? I said, stop talking about me like I'm not capable of deciding what I want. They said I was stubborn and that I always had to learn things the hard way. I told them, and you always have to be right even when you're crossing every line. The argument just kept escalating, back and forth, louder and sharper. At some point my sibling accused my fiancé of putting ideas in my head, and I snapped and told them, the only idea I needed was that I don't want you controlling my life anymore. They told me I was throwing away family. I said, no, you're throwing tantrums because you don't like losing influence. Then they said something that honestly ended everything for me. They said that even if my ex hadn't been perfect, at least he knew how to keep me in check. That was it. I told them to never talk about me like that again, and that it was disgusting to suggest I needed to be kept in check by anyone. They tried to backtrack and said that wasn't what they meant, that I was twisting their words. I said, no. I finally heard them clearly. My fiancé told them they were out of line and that if they kept treating me like something to manage instead of a person, they were going to lose me completely. My sibling said, so you're both just cutting me out now? I said, no. You did that yourself by refusing to respect me. They got quiet after that. Not calm, but quiet in that angry, tight way. Then they said, fine, do whatever you want. Just don't expect me to pretend this is okay. I said, I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm asking you to stop interfering. They didn't apologize. They didn't take back what they said. They just left. After that, things shifted fast. People who had been hearing one-sided versions of things started hearing what actually happened. Not because I blasted it everywhere, but because my sibling couldn't stop venting and the story didn't stay consistent. The concerned narrative started falling apart when people realized how involved they'd actually been with my ex and how far they'd gone behind my back. My sibling hasn't reached out since. No apology, no explanation, nothing. Just silence. My fiancé and I are still standing, still dealing with the fallout, but not fighting each other. The tension is still there, but it's not between us. The end. He's obsessed with controlling your narrative, weaponizing your ex to plant doubts, running whisper campaigns to your fiancé and mutuals, big posting for sympathy, then gaslighting you as dramatic / controlling when you set normal boundaries. That's not concern. That's toxic, creepy interference fueled by resentment that you're happy and don't need his guidance anymore. You and your fiancé handled it like adults. Clear boundaries, direct confrontation, blocking harassers. He escalated every time and still plays victim. You're not choosing a man over family. You're choosing peace over a sibling who treats your engagement like his personal drama playground. Stay no/low contact. Protect your relationship. Block the noise. You're 100% in the right. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Got a story to share? Drop it in the comments and let us know which one was your favorite.